coalition. According to the BBC News, Clegg and Cameron gave everyone the slip on Saturday, using decoy cars and having aides tell the press they were going home in order to have a private meeting, just the two of them. The BBC then went on to remark on the personal chemistry between the two men. What follows is the natural consequence of this story. It starts with those thrice damned television debates. They're supposed to be his for the taking. He's the fresh face, the one offering the change that people want. And then Nick sweeps in, with his boy band good looks and his easy charm, propped up by the advantage of no exceptions, not to mention the ability to talk about change without the irony of leading a party called the Conservatives. Dave feels caught in the middle, trapped on either side by left-leaning men who are intent on making him seem irrelevant. No matter how hard he tries to remind people how in touch he is, however many names of common people he drops, he knows he's floundering. When it ends, they go through the horribly forced act of shaking hands. Dave turns first to Gordon, a false smile in place, and then has to hold back to wait for Nick. His mind is already elsewhere, but then Nick reaches for his hand, and his other hand is on Dave's arm. Dave is jolted back to the present, instinctively responding in kind, and it takes a few seconds for his mind to catch up to the frisson that passes through him. Gordon heads straight to the audience to integrate himself, the sanctimonious git, but then Nick goes to follow, and Dave panics. They've not been briefed beyond the handshake. He's fairly sure they're supposed to stay where they are, though, and there's an awkward moment where he grasps Nick's sleeve without thinking about what he's doing, and he feels it again, the flutter in his gut. Eventually, Nick shakes him off and heads into the crowd, looking confident and at ease, while Dave feels like an idiot. And that moment pretty much sets the tone for the rest of the campaign. He should never have agreed to this, he thinks, as he watches his advantage slip away in the polls while Cleggmania sweeps the nation. So much uncertainty in this campaign, but of one thing Dave is absolutely sure. He hates Nick Clegg. It's unfortunate, really, that he has Rupert Murdoch one side. In fact, all but two of the major papers support him, and really, only hippies read The Guardian, so it's easy enough to rally them round and commence a targeted smear campaign. It's dirty, sure, but if Nick wants to play on the big boys, then he has to expect to be treated like one. That doesn't explain why, when he catches a glimpse of Nick's face on TV being interviewed about the accusations that he's a Nazi sympathiser, Dave feels a twinge of guilt. It gets worse when they arrive in Bristol. When they pass backstage, Nick looks him square in the eye and says, "I know you orchestrated this." Dave denies, of course, but the look of hurt on Nick's face is burned into his mind. At least he's prepared for the second debate, not that it helps a great deal. Gordon's obviously been given the same notes as him, be more like Nick. The positions have rearranged so that Nick's in the middle, and Gordon takes advantage of this to set himself aside as the elder statesman. Boys squabbling at bath time, he calls them. That rattles Dave, but not as much as when Nick turns on him, self-righteous in his indignation at the Tories' allies in Europe, or demanding figures that he simply doesn't have. Dave doesn't think it could get any worse until they step forward to shake hands. This time Nick moves swiftly and decisively towards him, looking him straight in the eye as they shake hands. A shiver passes down Dave's spine, and he can't hold that gaze for long. There's no real reason for it to happen, no momentous occasion that shifts the balance. Nick's been on his mind all day, but no more than usual. The Lib Dem leader is always lurking just beneath the surface of his thoughts. Whatever the cause, Dave wakes one morning, hot and sticky, with images of Nick Clegg writhing against him still echoing in his head. He heads straight for the shower, desperately reassuring himself that it's only a dream, that it means nothing. Yet the first time he catches Nick's eye in Birmingham, he feels an uncomfortable squirming in his stomach. And this time, he knows what it means. The weird thing about elections is that election day itself is somewhat anticlimactic. Dave heads to Whitney to cast his vote, waves to the cameras, then all he can do is wait. The waiting is agonising, but at least this takes his mind off the Nick problem. He feels nervous at his count. Yes, it's a safe beat, but how humiliating would it be if he lost? It's almost as bad as when he wins, because by then the news from elsewhere isn't good and he has to give a lacklustre speech. The night drags on, and as Friday dawns, two things become clear. First, they haven't done enough, and second, that he's going to have to talk to Nick. The first phone call is surprisingly amicable. Dave offers his commiserations on Nick's poor results, and to his surprise he finds he really means it. Nick is philosophical, but his disappointment is apparent in every word. It's strange, but with the pressure of the campaign lifted, they talked with surprising ease. In different world, Dave thinks they could have even been friends. The talk does eventually turn to business, though they're both too exhausted to do more than agree to discussions the next day. To Dave's relief, Nick does agree to talk to him first. There's a lot to be said for having an opponent so absurdly idealistic that he actually stands by his word. Nick would have made a good Prime Minister, Dave thinks ruefully, but he'll take that secret to his grave. What follows is a flurry of meetings, his own MPs as well as the negotiating team from the Liberal Democrats. It's frustrating trying to make progress when there are so many people around, each with their own vested interest, and always the media frenzy lurks just outside the door. As meetings drag on and the list of complications only increases, it seems that number 10 drifts further and further from his sight. Talks get more and more confused, and Dave wishes wistfully that he could just directly talk to Nick. He spots his chance at the VE Day service, where the three party leaders stand side by side. There's a moment shortly beforehand when Gordon is occupied by someone else, so Dave seizes the opportunity. He attracts Nick's attention with a light hand on his arm, and in a hushed voice says, "Do you think we can get away tonight?" Nick looks him straight in the eye, the glint that lurks beneath his smile sending a shiver down Dave's spine. Dave protests that it was what he meant, but he's suddenly not all sure that would be true. So he simply nods as they agree to give both the media and their own parties the slip to have a private meeting. "They'll only try to barge in if we tell them," Dave says of their respective senior MPs, all too aware that it's himself to whom he's trying to justify this plan. "Yes," Nick agrees. "We wouldn't want that." A smile tugs at Nick's lips, and Dave has to look away. He doesn't believe for a minute that they're really on the same page here, but that doesn't stop tantalizing images from flashing before his eyes. Dave's heart is racing as he manages to slip away from his party and even evade the press with the aid of a decoy car. He arrives alone at Admiralty House. Nick isn't there yet, and it's dark, but for the streetlights outside, flickering through the blinds. He starts to pace the room. What if Nick doesn't come? What if this is all a game, and the Lib Dems are secretly doing a deal with Labour behind his back? His nails dig into his palms. He's so close he can feel it. Number 10 is within his grasp at last, and it's humiliating to have to court the third place man, especially when he can't stop thinking about how Nick's hands would feel on him, or how Nick's cock would feel inside him. He starts at the sound of the door opening, and blood starts pounding in his ears when Nick slips into the room, smiling that easy smile as he closes the door behind him. "Don't think anyone saw me leave," Nick says. Dave knows it doesn't mean anything, that it's just what they agreed, but the implicit illicitness of the encounter sends an involuntary shiver down his spine, and he feels his cock twitch. To Dave's horror, Nick's eyes flicker down to his crotch. He can't possibly say anything in this light, but Dave turns away. They exchange pleasantries, but Dave can hear the wry edge to Nick's voice. Nick, somehow, knows what's going on here, while Dave has no idea. His own voice sounds choked to his ears, barely audible over the rushing of blood. He tries to remember why they're here, all those words about the good of the country, but even with his back turned he can feel that Nick is moving towards him. He tries hard to regulate his breathing, desperate not to betray the tension he feels, but then Nick's hand is on his shoulder, fingers tracing down his forearm, and a choked gasp escapes him. There's a low chuckle from Nick. "You should have said," he murmurs. "Perhaps we can negotiate after all." With that, Nick's hand slides around his waist and down to the cup, the noticeable bulge in his trousers. Dave wants to shake him off, he really does, but his body betrays him by pressing into the touch. "So," Nick murmurs into Dave's ear, breath hot against his neck, "about this big, open, comprehensive offer." Dave shudders. Nick's hand presses more firmly against him. It's almost painful. His erection strains against his trousers, trapped by Nick's fingers, and he wants so badly that it hurts. He considers turning and running, putting as much distance as he can between them, but then Nick moves closer, and Dave can feel the unmistakable press of an erection against his arse. His head drops back against Nick's shoulders. He lets out a strangled sound. And then, so suddenly he feels as though the world has been whipped out from beneath him. Nick's hand is gone, and he steps away. Dave barely has time to recover his breath before he hears the tantalizing rasp of a zipper. He turns, slowly, and his breath catches in his throat at the sight of Nick drawing himself out. Nick gives himself a couple of long, slow strokes, catching his lower lip between his teeth, and then glances up towards Dave. Dave can't tear his eyes away. Nick is long and thick, and Dave's overcome by the urge to lick the drop of fluid that's gathering at the tip. He catches Nick's eye, and there's a challenge there. Dave bristles. If Nick thinks he won't go through with this, he's wrong. Before he can talk himself out of it, he's on his knees, batting away Nick's hands and wrapping his lips around hot, firm flesh. Dave knows he's good at this. You don't become the leader of the Conservative Party without knowing how to suck cock. He applies every trick he knows, running his tongue along the underside and around the glands, then over the slit to lap at the pre-cum gathering there. That causes Nick's breath to hitch, so Dave focuses right there, dipping his tongue into the slit while he sucks hard. He looks up to catch Nick's eye, knowing that no politician in the world can resist the sense of power that view affords. Nick, barely even looking flustered, in fact, he's smirking. Feeling irrationally annoyed, Dave sets to his task with even more fervour. He grips Nick's hip fiercely and sucks hard, taking almost the full length of him into his mouth, the tip nudging the back of his throat. Concentrating hard on suppressing his gag reflex, Dave swallows. The reaction is violent and immediate. Nick jerks, clutching at Dave's hair, and a sound that is almost a moan escapes him. Encouraged, Dave keeps up the pressure, but Nick groans, "Stop," and pulls away. Dave sits back on his heels, smirking, as he takes in the sight of Nick, usually so composed, gasping for breath, his face red and his hard cock still glistening with Dave's saliva hanging out of his trousers. "Over there," says Nick, waving towards an armchair. At first, Dave doesn't move, but then Nick withdraws a tube of lubricant from his pocket, and Dave can't disguise the spike of lust that bursts through him. It's unnerving that Nick is so shameless about having preempted this, but Dave can't bring himself to back out now. He obeys with undignified haste, staggering to his feet, kicking off his trousers and groaning with relief as his erection is freed. He wraps his fingers around it, a shudder racking his frame. Nick stops him by placing a firm hand over his expression half disapproval and half amusement. Dave is overcome by the sudden urge to wipe that expression off his face by kissing him. Before he can fall prey to that impulse, he hurriedly backs away and arranges himself on the armchair. He kneels, his elbow resting on the back of the chair, presenting his arse, feeling exposed and hopefully aroused. Nick is frustratingly gentle, circling his entrance with one slickened finger so that it twitches in anticipation before he gradually slides inside. Dave moans, his head dropping down onto his arms as he bears down on the intrusion. Feels good, but it's not enough, and Nick is moving too damn slowly. "Get on with it," Dave gasps. "Bloody tease." He feels rather than hears the rumble of Nick's laughter. Nick's response is to slowly withdraw his finger and then shove in what feels like all three at once. Dave smothers a cry in his forearm and pushes back hard. Nick holds still, refusing to move, so it's up to Dave to ride his fingers, rocking back and forth while helpless. Involuntary moans escape him. He's all too aware of how ridiculous he must look, but far from being embarrassed, he's desperately turned on. He has the fleeting thought that Nick could be blackmailing him, but then he thinks of how the public would feel about squeaky clean Nick shoving his hand up the arse of the Tory leader, and his fears are quelled. There's a lot to be said for mutually assured destruction. His thoughts are brought back to the present with a sudden jolt as Nick removes his fingers. Dave lets out an involuntary moan of protest, but is reduced to wordless pleading when that hand finally wraps around his cock. Nick's fingers are still slick with lubricant, and his grip is firm. His strokes sure. Dave bucks his hips, heat flooding him as long-awaited relief draws near. He's so close that only closing his eyes and thinking of Gordon can hold him back. Nick stills his hips with a hand, and then at long last, Dave feels the hard, blunt end of Nick's cock sliding between his cheeks. Nick teases, circling the edge of his hole with the tip of his cock, but not yet pressing inside. "For God's sake," Dave chokes out, "don't you dare ask me to concede PR now." Nick laughs as easily as though they were conversing over a pint, the rhythm of his hand on Dave's cock never faltering. "You spent too much time around the Tories," he replies. "We're not all like you." To be continued.